That guy? That's me. My excuse for looking like this? I'm a writer.
Eddie, maybe it's time to let the writing go.
But just in case you think nothing ever happened to me.
Eddie Mora. Hey.
Okay, so this is episode 6 of TCRS Book Club. We are here with Justin Fox, the author of The Cape Raider. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Nick. Good to be here.
So you're in Cape Town. When did this book come out?
It came out last year, sort of April, I think, is when it appeared here and in England at the same time. It was launched in both places with 2 different publishers in the same month. Yeah.
Are you happy with how it's done?
Yeah, it's certainly been my best book to date by far. And that's largely because of the British and American audience. You know, the South African audience is really small. So my local publisher, which is Penguin, that's a small print run with a modest readership, but it really took off first in the United States, and then it really went pretty well in the UK. So it's done far better than I expected.
I see you've got almost 2,500 reviews. It's rated, I think, 4.5 out of 5. It seems like you've hit the jackpot.
Yeah, it's been a lucky break, I think. I probably hit the right vein with the right sort of topic at the right time. Probably just lucky.
I think it's more than that. But we are going to talk about that, getting into the flow of writing, your journey as a writer. Just quickly, how long did that book take to write? From the first letter to...
Yeah, there was a lot that went on beforehand. So 4 years of research, fairly intense research, because the historical fiction, you've got to really get on top of your period. And then the writing was about a year. It's about one hard, concentrated year, but the whole project 5 years. Yeah,
that's actually quite incredible. 4 years of research, so 4 years just collating that information, and then 1 year just putting it all together. Intense effort.
Yeah. I've just brought out the second book in the series, which came out about 5 days ago, and that one I turned around in 18 months. But that 4 years of research initially has got me into the period, and so it's now quicker to be able to turn around the writing. Yeah. So
when you say 18 months, how much of that was research? How much of that was writing?
I'm sort of working on a 6-6-6. So 6 months research, 6 months writing, six months editing. That's the cycle I'm working on for these historical novels now.
Okay. To all the Christians in the audience, calm down, guys. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's quickly go through your bio. You're a travel writer, novelist, photographer based in Cape Town. How I know you, like Ron Irwin dropped your name, and I was like, yeah, I know Justin. I know you through being the editor of Getaway magazine until 2020. But from when to when were you there?
I've been in and out of Getaway magazine for 22 years, but most of that period I was a photojournalist, and then I was freelance for a while. So being actually as an editor was 2 years, 2018 to 2020. And then I pulled out when COVID hit, because magazines and travel and the whole travel industry sort of imploded. And at that point, I got out and focused hard on fiction writing.
We had in a way, similar journey because I was also a photojournalist. I was also writing a little bit for Getaway, not so much for Getaway, but for many magazines. I think I was published more in Country Life. And of course, Country Life doesn't exist at all today.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember your writing, and I also did a little bit of freelance for Country Life. There were a lot of travel magazines kicking around in the 20 years until COVID hit, and then it was carnage, and most of them are gone, and all the in-flight magazines disappeared overnight. So the whole travel writing industry took a bad knock 2 years ago.
So one thing you might find amusing or interesting was I started true crime writing probably 2014, but I reached at a certain point where I was like, I can't serve two masters. I can't write books the way I was writing them and do photojournalism, I've kind of got to choose, not 100%, 0%, but I kind of thought I've got to start serving one master. And you might, I don't know what you think in retrospect, but this was before COVID. I thought I'm going to have to serve one master, and I chose writing books, which I think most people would say you're nuts.
Yes, you are nuts. And I was trying to do the same thing for most of my career. I was trying to do getaway and travel writing as the day job, and writing books as the weekends and holidays, and at night when I got home from work. And it was a tough ride. And then, but COVID made the decision for me. There was no way I could pursue both masters. And it also, I mean, COVID was in a sense a blessing in disguise. It forced me to sit quietly in my room for 2 years and really focus on fiction writing, which I'd never had a chance to do. It was always something I was doing on the side. And so I managed to do 3 books in 3 years, more or less. It's been an intense process of getting on top of book writing and sort of stepping away from the travel journalism for a while. It hasn't gone, and I would like to do a little bit more. But for the moment, it's hardcore fiction writing and a little bit of non-fiction writing, but all in the book space.
The irony is, when COVID hit, I was like, I'm retiring from book writing, and I'm now going to travel. And then it was like, sorry, we're shutting the whole world down. You stay right where you are.
Yeah.
So it was a really weird thing. So anyway, so let's go through your story here. Let's just bring it back up. So you, a Rhodes Scholar, you got a doctorate in English, so it's actually Dr. Justin Fox, guys, from Oxford University. My closest claim to fame with Oxford is I knew someone who studied at Cambridge. I just knew someone.
The enemy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you were a research fellow at the University of Cape Town. I did know that, with Ron Irwin, right? Or in his...
Yeah, I was in the same department as Ron, and I taught a little bit with Ron, and in the English department and in the creative writing department. So I bounced around, always just part-time lecturer, part-time supervising master's theses, that kind of thing. And that went on for, almost until COVID as well. I was doing occasional teaching at UCT.
Your articles and photographs have appeared internationally in a number of publications on a wide range of topics. Short stories, poems have appeared in various anthologies. You've written scripts and directed award-winning documentaries. 2-time Mondi Journalism Award winner, 1999 and 2004. Recent books include Cape Town Calling. Is that the one that's... No, that's not the one that's just come out. Oh, it's Ron that's writing a book on Cape Town. What is the book is it The Wolf Hunt that's just come out?
The Wolf Hunt has just come out, which is the sequel to The Cape Raider, which we're talking about today.
Is that already available on Amazon?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we'll have a look at that. Okay, and so, yeah, you published Under the Sway, The Marginal Safari, Whoever Fears the Sea. That's such a great title. The Impossible Five, Beetroots, spelled B-E-A-T. The Cape Raider, which is the book we're going to be talking about here. You were longlisted for the 2011 Alan Payton Award for Nonfiction, the 2012 Olive Schreiner Prize for Literature, the 2014 Etisalat Prize for Literature, the 2022 Sunday Times Fiction Award, and you're the winner of the Patricia Skonstein Poetry in McGregor Award. Well, it takes quite a long while to get through all of those awards and so on. If you guys are interested, Justin's on Facebook. I'll just put a link to that in chat. By the way, let's just quickly acknowledge who's in chat. Sonia Stanger, Mel Stiller, Bria Lace coming in from France, Terry Dean in California, Sagedi Norna, good to see all of you here. Snowflake Forest from Hawaii. I wonder whether you may be more interested in issues of a maritime nature, with the history over there. So, Justin, I'd like to sort of go to. We're gonna deal with your book, but I want to sort of start with how writing started for you. Like, what would you say was some of the first moments that you knew that you were a different animal? Because I think writers are different animals. What sort of books were you reading? What happened when you were a kid? Was it influence from parents? Was it books that you had at home? What's that part of the story?
Yeah, as a kid, I was really encouraged to read. My parents were absolute avid readers, read to me in bed from when I was 2 or 3 years old. And I suppose I wrote my first little book when I was about 11, and it was a book about a Second World War warship.
Wow.
So it's taken me 40 years to come back and rewrite that story. But that was the first. It was probably about 8 pages long. I was in grade, what do they call it now, grade 7.
So you kind of honored inner child. You've resurrected your inner child in that sense.
Yeah, and so the kind of travel writing has almost been a digression for 20, 25 years, and it's taken me a long time to get to fiction, to get to this kind of fiction. And in a sense, the kind of books I really loved as a teenager were these kind of Second World War adventure stories, the Alistair MacLean's, Nicholas Montserrat. The movies I used to watch were Guns of Navarone and A Bridge Too Far, kind of very much that kind of Second World War adventure story. And then I became much more academic and so on. And that took me on down another track, going through the full academic UCT, Oxford, English literature. The writing became much more controlled and serious and academic and non-fiction. And I've had to relearn. Once I got out of that, after 9 years of academic writing, had to relearn the kind of narrative techniques, plot building, character structure, which is so incredibly different to what you do as a student. The journey's been an interesting one. It started off very creative, then it went very academic.
But just a second, so I just want to ask you, what would you say is the main ingredient with fiction writing, as opposed to nonfiction?
Yeah, it's about plot. It's got to have a really, really good plot. That's the most important thing. And the second most important thing is
a word that you've got in your title that I really like is authentic. You say the Cape Raid, it's this book, an authentic adventure story. Right?
Yeah, and that's the very rigorous academic, sticking to the facts, making sure you do your very, very solid research. And that's the bedrock, the platform before you can start writing historical fiction, where you're making up characters and you're making up events and you're plotting a good story. You've got to have the bedrock of history. So you're working within quite a rigid framework, and the framework is the period and the time and what was happening. And boy, you can't get that wrong, because there are going to be so many readers, particularly with a subject like the Second World War, that really, really know their stuff. And so your characters and your ship and your romance and can be fictional, but it must sit very comfortably in the time and the place, and you must be able to be referring to Churchill and Hitler and Jan Smuts and South African history for the period with a lot of knowledge. Otherwise, you're going to get caught out very quickly.
So can I ask you, in terms of, so it's set in Second World War, right?
Yeah.
So do you try and use the language of that period, meaning the sort of colloquialisms, or do you have it with today's language with a few touches here and there? How do you deal with that aspect?
I've tried to make it as authentic as possible. And so I've tried to write it so that the dialogue is period. And I read a lot of books from the time. and I've even written it in a way that is it's almost paying homage to the kind of books that were written at the time. It's almost a period piece, the book. And what makes it different to those books that one read as a child, that were written in the 1940s and 50s, is I've set it all in contexts that I'm very familiar with. Cape Town, Simonstown, the South Atlantic, Saldanha, Arniston, all the villages and towns that I know and love, and the geography that I'm very familiar with. And so that brings in a very local feeling, but it's still very much rooted in that tradition and that period, both in style and in dialogue.
Have you got a boat?
I don't, but I have a surfboard and a windsurfer, and I'm in the water all the time.
So have you been on boats quite a bit?
I have. I was, I'm a sailor. I spent many months at sea. I sailed down the Atlantic on a medieval sailing ship. I was in the Navy for my national service, and I crew on a boat regularly. I spent yesterday afternoon sailing around Robben Island. So I'm in the water and on boats all the time. It is the sea and boats are really my first love.
I think your name may have come up. I say this under correction, but we were talking. I actually meant to say to Ron, because Ron actually wrote for National Geographic, and just by pure luck, I bought a I don't normally buy magazines of late. I'm ashamed to say to a magazine editor, but I bought a National Geographic just on the spur of the moment, and there was an incredible article in it about the voyage of Magellan. You know, basically the 500-year anniversary of the first ever circuit of the Earth.
Yes.
And I think I was just sort of waxing lyrical, just saying that that history doesn't need to be embellished because it's so extraordinary, you know.
Yeah. That's actually what I did in 1987-88 was to reenact a voyage that took place 30 years before Magellan, and that is the voyage of Bartholomew Dias, who in 1487 sailed around the southern tip of Africa. And so we did a reenactment voyage in a replica of his caravel in 1987-88, 6 months at sea, and I was the youngest crew on that. And I tried to write a book about it. That was probably the first book that I sent off to a publisher. It was rejected, you know how these things happen. But I was 20 years old and spent 6 months at sea on a medieval sailing ship, and it was an incredibly powerful experience, and it feeds into my writing now with all this nautical stuff.
It was almost like space travel in those days. You didn't know where the end of the Earth was. You didn't know what was out there. There weren't maps that went out that far. You ran the real risk that your ship was going to be destroyed and that you were going to go down with it. Quite tragic. Absolutely. That the ship, the Victoria, that was part of the Magellan fleet, we don't even have a plank left to commemorate it. You know, the original.
Yeah.
I would love them to try and use modern technology and try and find that ship wherever it is, you know, on the bottom of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
You know,
the guy Bartholomew Dias, the ship that we reenacted, he came around the Cape a few years later on the next voyage, but he hit a storm and lost with all hands and ship gone as well. Yeah.
So I wrote about that in some article. I wish I could remember. I think it was. It could have been related to some other artist, but wasn't there also Vasco da Gama? Wasn't he even earlier? Or was he?
No, he was a little later. He was 1490 something. He was a few years later, 1497, I think. So 10 years later. Yeah.
And didn't he get like to the Wild Coast sort of area, and then everyone said, "That's it, we're going back"?
No, that's Bartholomew Dias. He turned back. Okay. Vasco da Gama all the way. Yeah.
Okay. So what you can see on your screen now is just a little clip or an image from the movie Limitless. So for how many of you guys in chat know about the movie? So let me explain just very briefly to you, Justin. It's a story of a down on his luck writer who then ingests a pill which allows him to use all of his brain. Now, I know that's actually a myth. We don't only use 10% of our brains, but it's kind of taking that myth and imagining that it's true. And so this guy who's actually a writer takes this pill, and suddenly his thinking becomes crystal clear. And where we had writer's block for years, he just suddenly starts churning out books just like this. He starts learning all sorts of languages. But there's a moment in the movie that is so fun to watch as a writer. It's where he suddenly achieves a state of flow. He's sort of sitting by his keyboard, and he is just, like they represent that by showing looks like yellow, almost like the Matrix, but it's sort of yellow letters falling out of the sky like around him, and he's just like totally in the zone. Do you experience that? Is writing flow for you, or is it blood, sweat, and tears?
I've never ever experienced that. For me, it is blood, sweat, and tears. I'm a very mechanical writer. I work to a particular program. I plot everything before I write. If I were to wait for flow and inspiration, I would never get anything done. So I'm quite prolific, and I work to a structure. And if I don't have that structure, I'm completely lost. The only time that I would get close to a little bit of flow is when I write poetry, and then I've got to be completely in the zone, and it's got to be a short burst, and that can be mildly inspirational where it's not so structured. But for all my fiction and non-fiction writing, I need structure, I need control, I need set times of day that I write, and I need everything properly plotted.
Yeah, so the bad news for the wannabe writers out there is this idea that you can either snap your fingers and take a pill and suddenly everything's going to flow and be wonderful, that, or somehow you stumble upon a state of mind that allows you to just effortlessly write. I don't know, when you said what you said, I sort of felt you are obviously a real writer, because real writing is hard. It is blood, sweat, and tears. It's backbreaking work. It is not easy, right?
And it's thousands of hours. If you're writing a 300-400 page book and you're writing 4, 5, 6 hours a day, every single day, there isn't much space for waiting for a muse or for a spark of inspiration. You've got to just get on with it. And maybe you write stuff that is really crap for a few days, but at least you're getting something down, and then you can come back and rework it, which I do a lot of. But get something down, no matter what.
So Run the World asks, where can we find your poetry? Do you have a book on poetry?
I do. A book just came out 6 months ago. That's Beetroots, called Beetroots, and it's sort of it's kind of American Californian beat style poetry written about South Africa primarily. So a lot of road poetry, travel poetry, open road poetry, very much getting into the zen and flow of travel and trying to capture that in quite experimental ways in poetry form.
Okay, I'm just trying to see if I can pick it up here. Cape Town Calling. Secret Cape Town, Unspotted. I'm not picking it up. Is it a Kindle book?
No, it's not, because it was a small publishing house here in Cape Town called Caravan Press. You'd have to probably Google it rather than go through the Kindle or Amazon routes.
See if I can just bring it up. Beetroots, Caravan Press. Okay, there it is. Okay. So Run the World, if you're interested, follow that link. Okay, so did you find when you wrote, so obviously the Cape Raider wasn't your first book, right?
No, it's actually my 22nd or 23rd book. It's been a long road.
Was that book different to the others in that you wrote the actual writing part of that book was faster than the others?
Yes, yeah, much faster, much more intense, and almost in one sitting. Like it was three or 4 months of really of just not leaving my desk, basically.
I know what that feels like. So how many pages is it?
It's about 300 and, well, let me see, 300 and about 300-ish.
Okay. Because that was something I learned, was if you write fast, you write better. The more time you take, the more time it's going to take. And I think that's the biggest lesson to tell any fledgling writer is get it done as fast as you can.
Yeah, get it done, and you can always come back and edit, and you will come back and edit. But the most important thing is to get it done, and if you're writing something like fiction, to stay in the moment and in the zone, and that means writing every day and not leaving long gaps, so that you can stay in character, in period, for the duration, if possible. It's a great luxury to have the time to do that.
Yeah, I must say that's the shocking side of writing, is if you write books and you think you can just walk away and come back and write another book. It doesn't work like that. You actually need to. I'm on Patreon as well, so I try and exercise the writing muscle on Patreon. But I expect you to come back to writing maybe in my 60s, hopefully as late as possible. But I'm expecting to be shocked by how much of that I don't know what you can call it, familiarity with it, you lose.
Yeah, I think it's different. I find it different with fiction, non-fiction. I can go away from non-fiction and come back after long gaps, and it doesn't damage the writing too much. It's with fiction, I kind of feel I need to stay in the zone.
Yeah, that's good news if it's going to apply to me, because I write mostly non-fiction. I've got one little fiction book here. This is a 500 page one. That was my Cape Raider. That took a lot out of me, I must say. Also, your concentration levels have got to be way higher, because you're creating. It's like world building, but it's based on the world. So
And there's more at stake with fiction. I think you're exposing yourself much more. It really is you. Whereas with non-fiction, you can often hide behind the facts or build a superstructure of facts. Whereas with fiction, it's you, and it's your world, and it's your characters, and it's the loves and hates of characters, and it's coming from you, and because the stakes are so high, I think one is also much more emotionally exposed by it, and you're also much more susceptible to what critics think and feel about your fiction. Yeah. And so if you get some really bad reviews, it is much more painful with fiction than it is with non-fiction, strangely.
So for those who don't know, I think you and I know this, but there's some others who may not know this. I know when I was very early in my journey, I spoke to other writers and they said, start with non-fiction. It's a lot easier. You're going to have the fiction market is far more competitive, and you're going to struggle to get a toehold in there. Start with non-fiction, and then you can always come back to it later. And I hated that idea, but it is so competitive, the fiction area. And that's why I really congratulate you on doing so well in such a competitive area.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased about that. It's not my first novel. The first novel didn't do so well. It's a pirate novel set in East Africa. So it's really nice to get one under the belt where you do feel it's working. And yeah.
Okay, should we start talking about the Cape Raider?
Sure.
The beginning of it, so you did say that you you were already in that mind space as a child, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then when I was 17 years old, as many South Africans back then in the 1980s had to go into the South African Defence Force for your 2 years of compulsory service.
I
And
was
so
one of them, but I did
yeah,
1 year. So were you in the
lucky.
Navy?
So I was in the Navy, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I was
In
based
Simonstown?
based in Simonstown. So I had a
Okay.
good taste of Navy life and the environment and the hotels and the ships and the atmosphere, which is all what I've really used in the Cape Raider. And then I spent,
And there's
as I
a
said,
glamorous side to it, you know, the naval officer and the romance of the sea, right?
definitely way better than. I'm so lucky I didn't have to go to the army, and I was a naval officer, so I did my training, my naval officer training, and swordsmanship, and all that kind of thing, and wine tasting, and all the things that went along with an officer and a gentleman course, which is stood me in good stead with creating a character who is exactly that. So that was 17, 18. Then I was at sea on that medieval caravel for 6 months. That was also a good bedrock in being at sea for a long time in a very small vessel, cramped in with a lot of sailors, and learning how people relate to each other in difficult situations. If there's a storm or whatever, we were right in the middle of the Atlantic for long periods. We had 3 months at one stretch that we were mostly at sea. And so, yeah,
Have you
the
gone to the Pacific?
I have not. No, only Atlantic and Indian. And so the storylines come out of those early experiences and my reading, all those books I read as a teenager. And so that's the background. And then I started, about 2016, I started all the research, and the research meant going into museums and archives and libraries, both here and in South Africa and in England. England was even better, because when the Royal Navy pulled out of Simonstown in the 1950s, I think it was, they took all their records and the logbooks and everything back to England. And so those are all sitting in the British National Archives in London. So I spent a lot of time there going through all the material they had. And then the Imperial War Museum had fantastic photographs. The British Library had incredible books and material. And then in Simonstown, there are two museums. There's the Naval History Museum and the Simonstown Museum. The one gave me a lot of good material around nautical stuff, and the other gave me good historical stuff about the town. Restaurants, pubs, where did people stay, the dances, what people were wearing, the balls at Admiralty House. And that kind of stuff gave me wonderful background to the period. And my mother, who sadly passed away earlier this year at age 96, she was...
Sorry to hear that.
She was there, and her sister went to those balls in Admiralty House in the Second World War. And so I could pick her brain about what life was like in Cape Town during the war, the blackouts, the dances, the sailors in town, the Royal Navy, what people did, the cinemas, what kind of movies they went to, all that kind of thing, which is incredibly useful for a historical fiction writer, because it's those little details that give you the real color and flavor and create the authenticity that you need for a novel like this.
And what was your timeline that the Cape Raider is preoccupied with? Because it's part of a series, right?
Yeah, it's 1940 and the first half of 1941. So
Okay.
It starts at Dunkirk, where the hero is escaping from the French from the attack on the French beaches, on the Belgian beaches, and it ends in the winter of 1941, where he has to confront a German raider off Cape Agulhas. So it takes place over just over a year.
So when you talk about Dunkirk, it's the setting of the movie, in a sense. That's sort of where...
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
The book starts with that kind of scene, with the British being evacuated off the beaches, and my hero.
That movie, I can't quite remember when that came out. I know it was recently, but did that movie play into your imagination?
Absolutely. In fact, I was a bit freaked out when I saw the movie because I'd already written my first chapter and it was exactly what I'd been writing. So it was a bit spooky. But yeah, but it was exactly the kind of scene that I had visualized from all the reading I'd done.
Cool. Okay. So, did you? I imagine you will also other movies that you may have loved were like The Hunt for Red October.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I've been looking at all those kind of Second World War style movies, most particularly, and more recently anything to do with submarines, because book 2 is submarines. It's U-boats off the Cape.
Did you catch that series on, I think, Netflix about the World War II battles in color? Did you catch that?
Yes, I
That's
did.
incredible.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I learned in that was the biggest Navy battle in history. I think it was towards Japan. And
Yeah,
like
Leyte
all
Gulf
of
in the
that was,
Philippines.
yeah, I mean, all of that was like this incredible adventure. So I must say, if you guys are in chat and you're thinking, I don't know whether this is for me, because a lot of these guys are true crime folks. There is strategy in maritime warfare, big time. There's outthinking your rivals. There is, well, you're going to take us through that, but there's military strategy. And then I actually asked Justin this question sort of privately. I just said, what do you think of criminal psychology in terms of war? I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. I don't see that much difference between what happens in war and in crime, because the greatest criminals in history are people like Vladimir Putin and Adolf Hitler. So you have these are mafia bosses and criminals, effectively. That they might be in charge of a country and in charge of an army, but they are villains. They are criminals, and they have criminal minds. And when they're thinking about how to strategize about taking over a country like Ukraine, the kind of it's a criminal mind enacting.
There's propaganda as well.
Yeah, it's a grand
controlling
crime.
the narrative.
Yeah, and so for me, in my novels, Adolf Hitler is the arch villain, and a lot of the characters, my German characters, I try and create a mix of characters. Some are pure Nazis who are the sort of arch villain, and then I have the humans in there, the guys that are swept up in something that they really don't want to be involved in. So there's the good German and the bad German, but the idea of it being a crime against humanity, crime against society, crime against the country, that's something that I do think a lot about, and I think a lot about it really at the moment, particularly in looking at what's happening in Ukraine and all the people being sucked into this grand crime in Russia, the soldiers and the generals and so on. It's not their doing, but they're involved in a massive crime.
So we're going to jump into your book now, but I want to ask you one quick question. The bridge, the bridge connecting Crimea to Russia,
Kerch Bridge.
How do you think that bridge was blown up? Do you think it was from the air, from the water? Because there's a little bit of mystery surrounding that.
There's a lot of I think it was a truck bomb. I think it really was a truck bomb that the Ukrainians had managed to get explosives in.
Okay.
Theory, but there's a lot of conjecture. The Ukrainians are so sneaky, and they've got so many good ideas about how to do clandestine ops, and it's happening all the time.
Yeah.
It's almost
I heard that the deputy Russian dude of Kherson that died in a car accident. So I don't know if that's all
about car accident. Yeah.
But I don't know whether because he also criticized Russia. I don't know whether he died at Ukraine's hands, which I imagine makes sense, but could also be the Russians didn't like him criticizing them.
Could be.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go into the Cape Raider. Where does the name come from?
Yeah, it's one of probably about 20 titles I had going. The Cape Raider is, I needed to keep it short, punchy, and simple, and it's a German warship that disguised as a merchant ship, but it's coming to raid off the Cape and drop mines, particularly drop mines off the Cape sea routes to take out the convoys.
It's actually an incredible. It's an incredible concept that during the Second World War, the reach of those tentacles of war went all the way down the south coast of Africa, the southernmost. Just shows you how far war can reach, and that's in terms of the naval side of things.
Yeah, most people don't know how much of the Second World War was fought in South African waters. There were 150 ships sunk off the South African coast during the war. There were 28 German U-boats operating in South African waters. There were almost a dozen powerful German warships operating off South Africa. It was such a vital trade route for the convoys to come around the Cape when the Mediterranean was closed. That this was
close to Mediterranean.
Well, it was the Germans and the Italians were able to dominate through their air power, and so the British convoys.
Were the Germans going to shut off trade back to Britain and back to Europe?
Correct. So anything coming through the Suez Canal would have got wiped out in the Mediterranean, particularly in the early stages of the war. And so it was far safer for the British and the Americans to bring everything around the southern tip of Africa and up the Red Sea to supply the forces in Egypt. And as a consequence, Cape Town was the bottleneck. And this is where there was so much fighting. Very close within sight of land. Where I'm sitting right now, I'm on the water here. There were battles taking place within sight of where I'm sitting off the Cape Coast.
Okay, so in case you guys don't know, I'm sure many of you do, but in case you don't know, that silhouette on Justin's book is Table Mountain, which is sort of a monolith that backdrops Cape Town, which was a refreshment station through history, and then eventually the city of Cape Town developed there. But this is your story is really the HQ, I guess, that the main harbor is this setting, right? Cape Town.
Yeah, Cape Town was the main harbor for the merchant ships and Simonstown for the warships. Yeah.
But in terms of your story, it's the setting. It's Cape Town and Simonstown. Yeah,
it's the two. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go to that image. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that would be in about 1941, taken from a South African aircraft, and that would be a convoy of British ships coming into Cape Town and anchoring. And in the foreground would be a liner, probably a troop ship like the Queen Mary. And up to 50 ships in these convoys would be anchored in Table Bay, and then they would have to be escorted by ships out of Simonstown. And so that's the gathering of a convoy. And that scene
is that around 1940,
41, that period. And this is exactly is a scene from the book, would be the gathering of a convoy in Cape Town, ready to go.
I think that's the same picture.
Yeah, it is. Okay, that's called an Anson, and these were the patrol aircraft. So the South African sea routes were defended in two ways, one by ships, of which my hero Jack Pembroke is in one of them, and secondly by aircraft. And it was these aircraft, they're small patrol vessels that were looking for German U-boats and German raiders.
Is there a bubble at the bottom of the plane?
No, there isn't.
Okay.
They were lightly armed and rather slow and better on reconnaissance than actually attacking anything.
So I've got a question here from Bria. She says, do you know if there were more wars fought in waters in and around other parts of Africa?
Yes, there were. Both the First World War around our coasts as well, definitely. And there were, and certainly in the Second World War, around all the waters of Africa, certainly particularly up the east coast and on the west coast, both sides. And both sides attacked from all quarters. So the Japanese were operating along the east coast of South Africa very effectively. and the Germans particularly off the west coast. So First World War, Second World War, and then during the
I think,
Napoleon.
sorry to interrupt. I think
Yeah.
Bria's talking about other parts of Africa, like is Entebbe a coastal?
No, but off Kenya definitely, and off Somalia definitely, Tanzania definitely, and in the First World War even more so in some respects, because what is today Tanzania was German occupied, and what is today Southwest Africa was also German occupied. So there were fights in both those areas, and that involved the Navy, the British Navy, the Royal Navy, and South African ships were involved in those fights.
I seem to remember in the World War II in color, those chronicles, they said something about there was the biggest mobilization. I don't know if it was American mobilization. I seem to remember the most ships ever were sent to somewhere in Africa to deal with the with the Germans in North Africa. And the way I understood it was America didn't want to just sort of enter the war in Europe. They wanted to come almost from the side. And I seem to remember them saying the biggest ever mobilization, I don't know if it was army or ships or both, but they came ashore in Africa, I think, on the north.
Up until that point, it was the biggest landing, and it was the Americans, and it was in Algeria, and it was called I think it was called Operation Torch, and that was in I think late 1942 or early 1943, and to date that was the biggest. Of course, there were much bigger landings later, like D-Day and etc. But that was
what the harbor was there.
The one of the attacks was Tunis, and the other was Algiers, I think. Was an attack on Casablanca. There was another attack.
So Bria says, so are these mostly like military battleships between countries? Well, I think Justin can answer that, but I think it's submarines, ships, planes, mines, all of that.
In African waters on the east and west coast of Africa, it was mostly German and Japanese submarines doing most of the attacking against Allied warships. Of course, off the north coast of Africa and in the Mediterranean, it was everything: warships, aircraft carriers, aeroplanes, submarines. It was the whole hog. But the Axis powers were mostly using submarines as they came further south. They didn't have big enough fleets to take on the British and the Americans as in the southern waters.
So in your book, do you have any sort of James Bond like scenarios where a diver jumps overboard and sort of, is like a frogman going on his own sort of mission? Or is it from the bridge of the ship sort of setting?
Yes, it is. You're jumping ahead to book 4 there, which you're leaping ahead. It's coming. It's coming.
Okay. So what are we looking at in this picture?
Okay, this is my hero's ship. Jack, my hero, is the captain of something like this, which they were effectively fishing trawlers or whalers. They were whaling ships that were quickly converted at the beginning of the war to become minesweepers. So they'd have a couple of guns, and they would have minesweeping equipment on the back. They were very rudimentary, very slow, and rather badly armed. But what they were doing was clearing the mines that were being dropped around harbors and in shallow water. So they were extremely important in terms of keeping the shipping lanes free, but they were not very glamorous and not very pretty. And they were really just big fishing boats.
So is that a harpoon?
That would have been a harpoon before the war, and during the war it was a 12-pounder gun, an anti-ship gun, and then on the back, on the stern, there would have been an anti-aircraft gun. So if you pan across backwards a little bit to the right, there you see a little gun on the back, and that would have been anti-aircraft.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's effectively a scene from my novel. These are 3 minesweepers operating off Cape Town. You can see Table Mountain in the background on the left there. And these 3 minesweepers would be sweeping for mines off Sea Point, which is where I'm more or less sitting right now talking to you. And they would trawl back and forth across the entrance to harbors to make sure that no mines had been dropped overnight. And they did this every day of the war, come rain or shine. They were like the workmen, the handmaids of harbors. Not very glamorous, but so I picked a story that revolved around one of these ships.
I must say it's a very evocative photo. Even though it's black and white, you get such a gritty sense of what you are, where you're taking us.
Yeah. And this photo is actually from 1941 in exactly as the spot where one of the scenes in the novel takes place. So that's a very authentic picture in terms of my fiction writing.
Is that Table Mountain?
Yes.
Okay.
And that would have been a typical crew of a minesweeper during the war. And probably about 22 or 23 guys, 4 officers all dressed in white, and the sailors in darker uniform. And my hero would have been the tall guy in the middle there, the Jack Pembroke figure. And my story is a story
This
about
guy.
these. Yeah, he'd be my Jack, more or less. And so my story is to try and evoke the feelings, the emotions, the trauma, the hardships, and the elation of 22 guys on a little ship like this who have to confront a big and powerful German warship and what that does to them emotionally and otherwise.
And so somewhere in all of this is a woman.
Yeah, you got to have romance in these stories. And so Jack falls in love with a young UCT blonde, very pretty BA student who is very loosely modeled on my mother, who was also a 16-year-old UCT language scholar in 1941.
And she's not originally from Germany.
No, she's Afrikaans though, which will pose an issue in book 2 and 3, because in South Africa, the Afrikaans community, some of them were supporting Hitler. So it does make for an interesting plot twist further down the line. Yeah, those would be the 4 officers. This is in their winter dark uniform, not their whites for summer. And those 4 would have. Those are the 4 officers of a South African minesweeper in the war.
Okay. This guy looks quite good looking.
Yeah, my Jack Pembroke hero is a handsome, dark, square-jawed, traditional Royal Navy kind of hero. So I wanted to play him fairly straight, but of course he's not. I don't play it completely straight because he's got severe PTSD, terribly badly traumatized from what happened at Dunkirk. So he's not your normal heroic figure that goes into battle with not a care in the world. He is a conflicted and traumatized guy, and he has to overcome his fears, and that's part of the narrative, and that creates the development in the plot. Is how does he deal with his own trauma?
Is he trying to hide it away?
Yes, he is, but he doesn't hide it very well, and his crew sort of get to know that their captain is a flawed character.
It reminds me a little of the composition teacher in Saving Private Ryan, played by Tom Hanks.
Yes. Yeah.
Captain Miller.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So
it makes for a much more interesting hero if he is damaged.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally different to The Rock in, I don't know if you've seen Black Adam, where he's totally fearless and he just causes destruction everywhere, and it doesn't matter. No, the body count doesn't matter. Yeah. So have you, we'll come to this image in a second. Have you seen All Quiet on the Western Front?
Not the latest one. I saw the old movie from the 60s, and I'm dying to see the new one. I hear it's brilliant.
I saw it, and it's exactly what a war movie should be. It's so authentic that it's incredibly troubling and hard, but also as very gentle moments and very sweet moments. What it does capture, I hope it's not giving any spoilers, but what it does capture is the reality of death in war. It's not like a movie where, I don't know. It captures the difficulty of survival and of death really, really well. It doesn't weasel away from that, which I think is a really important theme. Is how do you face death, and how do you know what I mean? How do you? It's an obvious thing in war, but it's the way that they cover it is done in a very visceral but also authentic way.
Yeah, I'm really
So
looking forward to seeing that movie. Yeah.
I think it's going to be equally inspirational to you for your books going forward. Just the hardness of it, the harshness of it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Let's go back to that image.
Okay, the ship on the left is a German raider. Now, what these raiders were, they were merchant ships. They were disguised as merchant ships, so that they kept changing their appearance all the time. They would change their paint jobs. They'd put up second or third funnels. They'd put masts up and down. They'd change their flags. So there'd be one day it'd be a Swedish ship, the next day a Greek ship, but they hid all their weapons behind. Well, you can see on the side of the ship there, a big panel has flapped up, and the guns would then pop out. So they would try and sidle up to neutral ships or enemy ships, and then suddenly the flaps would come up, the guns would bark, and they would be able to attack other ships. And there were about 14 very effective German ships that were roaming the oceans during the war, disguised as merchant ship and causing absolute havoc. And they did a lot of damage off the South African coast. They also laid mines. They trapped ships. So they, particularly early on in the war, they were extremely effective. And this is the villain ship in my novel. It looks exactly like the one you're seeing in that photograph.
So there you can see the German flag. So quite recently we were covering misdirection on my channel. There's a lot of misdirection in maritime warfare where you raise a false flag, right?
Correct. So what this ship would have done is only when it opened fire would it suddenly put the German flag up. Until that moment, it would be flying a false flag, a British flag or a neutral flag, and then suddenly they whip off the disguise and attack.
So I'm going to ask you a kind of a silly question. Aren't there certain things that are illegal in war? And I'm sure people break those rules anyway. But for example, is it not illegal to say this is a hospital ship? You know, the flag with a red cross on it.
Yes, it is illegal. But in war, particularly in the Second World War, particularly under Hitler, all rules were forgotten. But what honorable German captains would do is they would, at the last minute, they would raise the German flag and then they would open fire. And that is technically okay.
Okay. So can you give us any other examples of misdirection? So that's a flag thing.
Yes.
Any other examples of that sort of thing?
Well, as I say, they would change the shape and look of these vessels all the time, so that they would mimic Allied ships, and they would have a whole team. There were 200 or 300 people on these ships, and they would all be set to work at night to completely change the look and the feel and the style of the ship, so that they could so radically change the appearance that by the next morning, a patrol would identify them as a completely different ship.
So could that include painting the ship and changing the name of the ship and things like that?
Everything.
And that's actually quite amazing. And so another thing, could they have like other uniforms? Like instead of wearing a white uniform, they wear I don't know, sort of blue overalls sort of thing.
You're breaking. So you broke up there for a little bit, changing uniforms and that sort of thing. Is that what you are? Yes, absolutely. They would have completely different outfits. So if they were a Japanese ship, they would dress all the sailors up in kimonos and change their hairdos and makeup and everything. It was a full subterfuge job that they did very effectively.
That is actually incredible. That's actually quite amazing. Okay, so because obviously with maritime warfare, you've got incredible line of sight. You pick up your binoculars and you think you can see all the way to what you're seeing, and oh no, don't worry about that. Meanwhile, it's not what you think it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the Agulhas minefield.
Yes.
So just to orientate the Americans here, there's Simonstown. And Cape Town is just around the corner, around about there. That is False Bay. This is the southern tip of Africa. And it's a little bit difficult to visualize, but just around the corner from Cape Town is this minefield.
So this is the exact minefield laid by a German ship in 1942, I think she laid it. And that is the course and the positions of each mine that she laid. So I took that as is, and I just made my villain do exactly the same route, sail in on that little route that you can see bottom right, and lay his mines in exactly that pattern. So I stuck very close to the history.
So I just want to help our viewers here. So if you look at this map, Cape Town is slightly up. This is the bottom of Africa. Cape Town is slightly up from the bottom, and then many people think Cape Town is the most southerly point in Africa, but it's actually just a little bit further down Agulhas, which is what you see over here. There. So that's kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, so I wanted to, at this point in the novel, be as close as I possibly could to what happened. I just used that pattern of that minefield. I had my German come in on the same route and just do the same thing. Where you stay really close to fact, then you can't be caught out too badly by your critics, and it makes it feel really authentic.
So let me ask you: have you told any lies in your book where you're like, this is a bit of an inconvenient truth, I'm going to just skip through it?
Where it comes to the historical facts, I've stuck absolutely to the truth. But of course, my character is a fiction, and his boat is a fiction. So all of the stuff around my hero is completely made up. But all the big stuff, the big ships in and out of Simonstown, the facts of history, what Hitler and Churchill were doing at the time, that is all I stuck absolutely to the facts.
You didn't manufacture any history where there was a bombing yesterday or something like that? Okay, no, that's interesting. Because, I mean, if you think about it, fiction, you can decide just how liberal you want to be with your reality. You can decide,
I'm quite conservative in the sense that I want everything to feel as authentic as possible. So the place that I play and have fun and make things up is just very narrowly around my hero and his ship. When he started to interact with bigger aspects in history, then I keep them pretty much as close to the truth as I possibly can.
So I don't know if you knew this. I didn't know this. Mel Stiller, who's I think from Portuguese descent, says Agulhas means needles in Portuguese.
Yes, it does. Agulhas. Yeah, it was the Cape of Needles, and there are two theories around that. They either think it means that the needle on the compass was starting to swing magnetically at that point, or the rocks around Agulhas are all very pointy, so they look a bit like needles. So the first Portuguese sailors were either referring to the compass or the rocks, or both.
I'm not sure what Deborah means by, is that the Horn?
No. Cape Horn is the southern tip of South America. Cape Point is Cape Agulhas is the southern tip of Africa.
Yeah. So what are we seeing in this picture?
Okay, so this is a German mine that broke free from its moorings and washed ashore on one of the beaches at Agulhas. And these are I think it's half blown up or probably
Yeah.
damaged. These are sailors recovering it. Yeah, so that's a German mine that is washed ashore.
So would it
19
normally be completely circular with little things
Yes.
sticking out? Okay.
Little horns, yeah. So that might have been it might have half exploded or something.
And are those horns like sort of pressure sensitive? If something touches
Yes.
them, okay.
Correct. So when a
And
ship bumps one of the horns,
do they float on the surface?
just below the surface, yeah.
Okay.
Just another shot of a very typical South African minesweeper operating in. This one's actually operating in the Mediterranean, but just to give you, I've got a few pictures here just to give you a sense of what they looked like. Rather scruffy fishing boats is more or less how they're described. Yeah, this is a bit kind of the history of my mother. The Delmonico's restaurant was the famous, glamorous restaurant in Cape Town during the war. And all the posh folk used to go there, and there'd always be a big band playing and people would dance. My mother and father danced there in 1942, 43. And so I put it in my novel. My hero takes, he takes the girlfriend here to dance and for a dinner. And it was very much kind of Spanish style. There's the ceiling had little stars on it and fake stars. And it was the in place in Cape Town in the early 40s.
Does it still exist?
No, it was knocked down, I don't know, in the 50s or 60s.
What part of Cape Town is it?
Right in the center, just off
really?
Adley Street, one of the side streets, yeah. And for me as a historical writer, finding these old photographs and then just setting my characters, I can use everything I see in that photograph. I can then use in the novel. The band, I know that they got white coats. I can see what people are wearing. I can see that the chairs are sort of wicker chairs. I can see the columns, so I can get a very good sense.
Walk by the pillar. Oh, I see you over there, kind of thing.
Exactly. Again, that's just off. That's Adley Street in Cape Town, and that was the Cape Town railway station, knocked down straight after the war. But when my hero first arrives in Cape Town, he takes the train from that station to Simonstown. And so again, these old photographs really give me a sense of an idea of what I'm looking for, because the Cape Town railway station today is a big, ugly concrete block. So it's important for historical fiction to get the look of the building right.
So is that the Standard Bank building?
Yes, I think so.
So my great-grandfather painted that building.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And apparently, this is just a little bit of being a little bit self-indulgent. Apparently, because he came from Holland and he was quite a big shot painter, he would paint outdoors and people could see him painting. And apparently it caused such a commotion, a crowd started gathering around him that this is the story anyway, that the fire brigade had to be called to spray the people to get rid of them. And it appeared as a cartoon in the paper the next day that they were trying to allow this artist to paint and they were trying to disperse the crowd. I think there's probably a little bit of exaggeration there, but anyway, he did paint the Standard Bank building.
Amazing.
Anyway. Okay. Well, that's changed.
Yeah, that's changed. That's just before the war. That'll be about 1938, 39, because the harbor is not completed. You can still see they're still building and dredging in the top of the shot. But this shot is interesting because the foreground is what is today the V&A Marina, which is the kind of fancy tourist district of Cape Town. But during the Second World War, the minesweepers moored there. You can actually see what are those little fishing boats that you can see there? During the war, those would have been the minesweepers. Yeah, around there, exactly.
And that's still there, isn't it? Isn't that still there?
That's the silo. That was the grain silo and is now the Zeitzmacher fancy art gallery.
And is that still there?
No, that power station was knocked down.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's in the novel. So again, the photography really helps in terms of where to place people. And Jack comes into this little harbor after one of the battle scenes and ties up at that jetty. So I can then get a sense of where he's going, what he's doing, and what it looks like.
So, is this a boat that's just entering? What's going on with the smoke here?
Those will be dredges because that was
Oh.
still too shallow. So during the construction of the harbour, they would have been dredging.
Okay. Do you have any photos where you actually see ships on fire in Cape Town?
No, I don't. There is one taken of a tanker burning off Cape Point, sunk by a U-boat. I don't have it here, but there is one. That's the only one I know of. So this is a battle scene, 2 South African minesweepers attacking a submarine. It's a famous painting in the Simonstown Naval History Museum. And it more or less mimics 2 of my battle scenes where 2 or 3 minesweepers take on a raider and they attack in tandem like that.
So what I want to emphasize to you guys watching is you've got someone writing fiction, and they are at liberty to make up whatever they want to make up. And he decides, you know what, I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to use license. I'm going to anchor myself kind of religiously. I'm going to obsessively anchor myself to the true fabric, right? So the context is all absolutely authentic, all absolutely real, which informs the reality of the character. In a sense, the context is another character.
Absolutely.
And arguably the most important character, right?
Yeah, no, I would say you're right. The history is the most important character because you can't mess that one up. That's everything in a historical. You can even kill your hero off. You just can't mess up the history.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I've got an idea, and I sort of picked this up looking at the war in Ukraine and looking at I did actually cover on this channel, I actually covered the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, yeah. And I just stumbled across this submarine sort of fan, and he's also written lots of books about submarines, and he had a staggering following. I think I don't know if he had 200,000 followers on Twitter, and I just realized, wow, there's, just as in true crime, we've got this fanatical fan base in a way, this fanatical following. You also have that to some extent in certain other areas, like, for example, yours as well.
Yeah, certainly the war historical stuff is huge, and of all of them, the Second World War group is probably the biggest and the most obsessive, I would say. Yeah, I found a wonderful painter from Scotland called Jim Ray, and he does these most incredibly beautiful watercolors that evoke Second World War scenes, and he keeps painting kind of trawlers and whalers and minesweepers, which suits me wonderfully. So I look on his site all the time, and that would be a typical minesweeper used as an escort. You can see the convoy in the background. So patrolling ahead of a convoy coming into Cape Town or Simonstown, the minesweepers, there'd be 2 or 3 of them in front of the convoy to clear a path to make sure there are no mines.
It's always an interesting contrast, fire and water. You know, like the ships today, you don't really see that there's a boiler or fires. But like in those days, you had this sort of thing, a chimney, and it was like quite obvious, you know?
Yeah. And for convoys, they're always shouting at each other to not make too much smoke because, of course, you can be spotted so far away. Yeah.
That's also quite interesting. Isn't that also another way that you can pretend to be a different kind of ship? So it looks like you're doing something with fish manufacturing, so there's more smoke, and then so you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. You can, if you're belching a lot of smoke, you're definitely a coal-fired ship, and then you could fake that, and they did fake that as well. Yeah.
So we've got someone from Australia saying, I might have to read your book. This is great stuff, fiction that is also non-fiction. Deborah's actually, her original avatar was Corporal Deb. She's actually a military lady in Australia.
Okay, great. Well, then this is exactly up your street, I hope.
For sure. Okay, so on to the next image?
Yeah, that's just the view out of the window. Out of my window where I'm sitting right now, to my right, I'm right on the water, and that's a contemporary trawler. And if South Africa went to war tomorrow, these trawlers would probably be used for minesweeping. Yeah, so that's just the kind of what excites me is looking out my window while I'm writing and seeing these sorts of scenes. That's during the Cape of Storms showing its teeth, and the trawlers making a run for Cape Town Harbour under extreme conditions.
I suppose another character, in a sense, is just the sea, the
Yes.
various emotions of the sea. Yeah,
Absolutely. And I love sea novels, and at university I studied Joseph Conrad, the great writer of the sea, and his novel Typhoon is a whole novel set during a storm. And one of the climaxes of the Cape Raider is a massive storm that lasts for 2 full chapters of the book. And I'm deeply inspired by writers like Conrad for that kind of gritty maritime writing about the sea.
Oh, okay, that shouldn't be there. Have we gone through everything?
Yeah, I think you've gone through my picks.
Okay. Okay, so so tell us about your next book, The Wolf Hunter.
Yeah, The Wolf
The Wolf
Hunt.
Hunt.
Yeah,
Wolf
it just came out 5 days ago. It's just dropped on Amazon and on Kindle, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. It's early days, but it basically picks up the story of Jack Pembroke from like 2 weeks after the end of the Cape Raider. I give him 2 weeks off, and now he's back in the hunt, and he's moved from minesweeping to being on an anti-submarine vessel. So his ship has been converted because the U-boats are coming, and this is all based on fact. U-boat packs started to arrive in South African waters in 1942, and so I've just brought it forward by a few months. And the biggest and worst wolf pack attack happened off Cape Town in September 1942, and in the space of 3 days they sunk 14 ships off Cape Town. So I've taken that as the core of the second novel, and it's how Jack and his crew and the rest of his flotilla try and defend the South African convoys against wolf packs. And the Germans at that stage in the war, the U-boat threat was potent, and they were extremely effective killers, and they were extremely effective in South African waters. In fact, the U-boats alone sank 120 ships off the South African coast. And so they were a deadly force. And so that makes a fantastic antagonist for my hero, Jack, to first of all, suffer tremendous defeat in a convoy to Durban, again, but based on fact. Convoy number DN21 in 1943 was decimated by one U-boat on its way to Durban, knocked out half the convoy. So it makes a good first climax for my novel, and then Jack has to get his revenge at some stage, and that would happen later in the novel.
So you can actually set your entire series in the basically 5 years span of the Second World War.
Yes, it's going to get a bit tight at times because book 3 and 4 and 5 are all happening in the spring of 1942. So I'm packing it in really tight, but. One of my favorite historical novelists is Patrick O'Brien, who did the Master and Commander series. And I learned from him that you can do 1806A, 1806B, 1806C, so that you can overlap. You don't necessarily have to have it absolutely chronologically. And in 1942, I'm going to have to pack things in because I need Jack to be in the Mediterranean and in Madagascar and on Malta. In Egypt and in Malta and in Madagascar in May 1942. So he's going to have a very busy time. I'm going to have to string out that month a bit.
So when you wrote the first book, before you got all the reviews and all the sales, did you decide it's going to be a series, or was it just, well, I want to write this book, and then did you know it would be a series? Did you hope it would be a series? Did it become a series after?
No, okay. I hoped. I didn't know how it was going to do. So I didn't know whether there would be a chance to write a second. I did conceive of it as a series, and very much inspired by the British tradition of the Patrick O'Briens, Douglas Remans, Alexander Kent, the Hornblower series. There's a healthy tradition in England of these sort of naval series, and I wanted to try and copy that in an African context. And so I always hoped I could pull it off and keep it going. My British publishers have taken the first 3, so 1, 2, and 3 are happening, and then we'll take it from there. And if there's appetite, then I'll keep going.
Any movie deals? TV deals?
No, not yet, but my agent is trying her damnedest. The problem with these is that they are really big budget, whole convoys, and it's all set in period, and it's all set at sea. And period and sea and many ships is all very difficult and very expensive, and lots of CGI. So we're trying.
Well,
would be nice.
I think your review numbers alone are basically saying, hey, there's a South African Michael Crichton, guys.
Let's hope, Nick.
Okay, so I must say that's really it just shows your confidence that before you'd even sold the books, you knew you were onto something that you wanted, a story you wanted to tell, a big story, very on a very big scale, and a long timeline. So that's yeah. Okay. So do you want to read us an excerpt from either book?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, Nick.
So we've got a question here.
Yeah, shoot.
Stephanie says, sorry, I came late. Did you say how you balance work and your personal life? And I guess Stephanie means when you're writing and, like in the middle of writing a book.
Yeah, I'm not a very nice person to be around when I'm writing, when I'm in the full swing of fiction writing, because I get into a bubble and a zone and I'm very grumpy, very grumpy. So I get up at
sleeping patterns.
Sleep's not too bad. I kind of get up at 8. I'm at my desk where I'm sitting right now at 8:30, and I have to get 1,000 words down before I'm allowed to do anything else. So that wouldn't take most of the morning. And then comes lunch, and in the afternoon, if I've got any steam left, I'll keep writing, or then I'll do some editing or some more research in the afternoon, or I'll try and get on the water. I'll go windsurfing or surfing or sailing to keep the relationship with the sea going, because I write so much about the sea and its moods and colors and rhythms and feelings that I need my sea time. But yeah, the hard slog of getting the first draft down, it's every day, all day, and 7 days a week, and I'm a grumpy person, so I'm not nice to be around.
Yeah, it is. You are very. I mean, you have to be very self-absorbed. You are all in your head, kind of thing. So, Stephanie, Justin did say 4 years to research. I think you said 18 months to write, or a year to write.
About a year. Well, that first draft is like 4 months. That was very fast. But then you're working it again and again and again. So then it ends up being a year. Yeah.
So based on the first book and then based on the second book, do you imagine the third book is going to be more efficient, even faster turnaround?
I'm not sure, because the book number 4 is set in Egypt and in Libya. It's sort of Cairo, Alexandria, Tobruk, and it's an area that I'm very unfamiliar with. I've just spent a week in Egypt, in Alexandria, researching all the spots where I want Jack, the hotels and restaurants and stuff where I want him to be. But it's not going to be like writing about Cape Town or Simonstown, which is in my blood. I know every location like the back of my hand. So,
and that makes writing really fun, because you go there and you're not just a tourist. You're like, okay, let me imagine, and so you're obviously also not just taking photos for fun. You're taking photos for research, which is in a way like a crime scene investigator, kind of saying, Well, how would this work, and how would they come in there, and what's the
Absolutely.
layout of the harbor, and where's the wind coming from, and what's the personality of the weather? Yeah, all those things.
Exactly. All that stuff is critical, and because I don't know Egypt very well, I had to go and feel it and be on location, and imagining myself to be Jack, go to the same hotels and restaurants and bars and clubs that he would go to, and pretend I'm in 1941 and try and imagine my way into his shoes. So it was very interesting process, but it's still going to be hard writing about that period in an environment I'm not so sure of. So I think the historical stuff I've got a good handle on, but that kind of nitty gritty of sights, sounds, smells, food, it's going to be a little bit slower and more tricky with the Egyptian and Libyan stuff.
And you want to pick up some of the local words, the local lingo.
Yeah. It's all of that. It's all those. It's like being a travel writer. It's the little details that count, that give the flavor and the local color.
As we say in true crime, the details matter.
Yeah. Same with historical fiction.
Okay, so you're going to read from the Cape Raider. Okay, so I'm going to put that on screen. Okay, cool. And I'm going to take myself.
Okay. I'm reading from a scene. Jack has arrived in Simonstown, and he really doesn't want to be part of his father's world. His father's the admiral. So what I'm going to read is the moment where he's kind of coming around to the idea that he will go and he will take on the job of captaining a ship in. And this is set in Simonstown. If any of you have been to Simonstown, it's more or less Boulders Beach where the penguins are. And he's in his father, the admiral's house, which is a big old rambling beach house above the rocks in sort of boulders. Sleep would not come to Jack. Perhaps it was still, despite his changed situation, the dread of what slumber might usher in, the ghostly nighttime consorts. Even the gentle shushing of the sea stroking the beach could not lull him to sleep. Getting out of bed, Jack pulled on a dressing gown and slippers. He padded down the passageway, pausing beneath the reproduction of a portrait of one of his forebears in dress uniform. A chest full of medals, an outthrust chin, one hand resting on a sword, another formidable Pembroke. Jack let himself out quietly through the French doors. His father's snoring was audible from the end of the veranda. A three-quarter moon hung over the Hottentots Holland mountains, casting a trail of glittering light across the bay. He took the path to the beach. The chirping of crickets filled the air as he passed beneath the milkwoods, then out into the moonlight and over the rocks. Kicking off his slippers, he walked down the beach. Warm water caressed his feet. False Bay's mountainous rim was dark and mysterious. He was weighing his father's proposal against his fears. Did he have the nerve to captain a ship, even if she was a small one, let alone lead a flotilla? He certainly didn't have his father's temperament or his conviction, his arrogance. But could there be a way to make this work? Having a command of his own was certainly tempting. In the months before Dunkirk, it was exactly what he'd wished for. Now the dream had been poisoned by something inside him that he found both frightening and unfathomable. He caught sight of a shadow coming round the headland from the north. It was obscured by the backdrop of dark mountains, but there was definitely something there, and it was moving fast. He narrowed his eyes and waited, feeling a strange excitement. It was a ship coming out of Simonstown harbour, knifing through the swell, showing no lights. Leaving for patrol, perhaps an enemy vessel had been reported. Each time she dipped into a trough, he could make out the moustache of her bow wave. After a while, he heard the low thrumming of turbines, a midnight creature of the deep. As the ship crossed the path of the moon, he saw her silhouette, a Royal Navy destroyer, long and sleek, an iron arrow, all power and grace, a thing of beauty. On the bridge, he could just make out a couple of heads staring ahead at the wide mouth of False Bay, opening to the South Atlantic. His heart beat faster. Damn, he said softly. Damn and blast. The drama of it, the necessity of it, taking the fight to the enemy in the southern oceans, a chance to hit back after all they had taken from him, his mother, his ship. Hate and anger, infused with the conviction he'd felt at the beginning of the war, flooded through him. He picked up a pebble, cupped it between forefinger and thumb, and sent it skipping across the water. The stone kisses spread circles through the quiet shallows of the cove. A long line of Pembroke captains stretched back into the fog of British history. Maybe, he thought, just maybe.
Wow, I must say that's this idea of throwing the pebble, skipping it over the water, and having that as an analogy for what's to come is pretty powerful. I mean, it's something that you can identify with.
Yeah, I think in trying to think about Jack, I had to look at how I could relate to him. And he's an ordinary bloke just out of university, doesn't want to be involved in the war, doesn't want to join the Navy, doesn't want to be involved in his father and the Admiral and the Cape and all of that sort of thing. He just wants to be a journalist in London, and he's thrust into something he doesn't want to be a part of. And this is the moment in the novel where he decides, okay, I've got to do it, and I've got to grab the nettle and take the fight to the enemy. So that's kind of a pivotal turn in the book.
So he's a reluctant hero.
Correct.
So besides that, what would you say are his character traits? Because I presume he distinguishes himself as a strategist, as an intelligent guy, as someone who can outsmart or outwit somebody else. So where does he get that? What do you call it? That sort of that acumen? Does it come from? Is it rooted in his childhood? Is it innate?
Yeah. Look, he comes from a line of Royal Navy captains that stretches all the way back to Nelson. So it's latent in his family, and there are admirals all the way back to the 18th century. So it's there. He just doesn't want to be a part of it. So it's been in his bones and in his blood, and he's been around his father in Portsmouth and in the Mediterranean. But he wanted to walk away and become a journalist and go to Oxford and live in London. And his younger brother goes to sea and becomes the Royal Navy captain. So Jack has it in him, and he's an intelligent bloke, and the strategy will come. He'll learn on the job. It doesn't go so well in the beginning because he's learning and because he's traumatized. So, and I think that this arc goes back and forth for him. In book 2, he's again overwhelmed by the onslaught of German U-boats that are very effective, and so there's got to be give and take, and he's got to be able to grow and then regress and grow again. And the PTSD also comes in waves, as it would quite naturally. My grandfather fought in the First World War and suffered tremendously from PTSD, and the trauma returns again and again. So he's never going to be out of the woods completely, but he has to steel himself in these great moments of battle and serve his country and his ship. So it's kind of the heroic, it's the reluctant hero, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
he gets it right some of the time, but not all of the time, and that's human.
So we spoke earlier about the myth of writing being easy, right? But there have to be times where you've done the research, you are 5 or 6 chapters in, you've been building up to a particular moment that's been taking a while to get to that moment, but now you're in that moment. It might be a naval battle, it might be whatever, an encounter or some dramatic moment. Don't you sometimes feel, I'm not saying like over an extended period, but you experience brushes where you sort of feel like that, where it's just sort of coming to you?
Nick, I wish I did. When I'm writing long form like this, it tends to be I tend to follow the process and follow the structure. I don't really have those kind of moments with long form writing. I get them with poetry when I'm writing a very short thing like a poem or a free flowing short piece. Sometimes
Do you not have occasions where you write and then you end up writing right through the night till like 4 o'clock in the morning? Because I have that quite a lot, but it's different. I don't have a wife, I don't have a family, so I can kind of get away with that. But it's happened to me quite a lot. I'll wake up I don't write now, but I'll wake up in the morning, go to my computer, work all day, and be like, I'm just going to write another hour. When I look again, and this is like at 7, 8 o'clock at night, I'm just going to write another hour, and then I'll get some dinner. And when I look again, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and the birds are singing. And like I said to some of my patrons, sometimes you think, wow, that was incredible. Like I'm going to win the Pulitzer for that kind of thing. But part of that isn't actually real. You are generating content, you are writing, but I just personally find when it's a struggle, when it's blood, sweat, and tears, that's much better writing than when you think it's all coming so easily. There are times when you're totally immersed in it, but yeah, I must say it is a blood, sweat, and tears thing most of the time. Yeah.
I think you're very lucky to get those bursts of incredible inspiration. I don't get them, and that's also, I think, I get it a bit with poetry. It's also partially because of its historical fiction. So it's so rooted in all the facts and the research that, I mean, I get one sentence down that feels like a bit of flow, and then I've got to go and check everything because, you know, what kind of cigarette is the person smoking, and what does the couch look like, and it's so rooted in those little details of period that you can't have a long run of just free flow, which I could if it's a contemporary novel, and I can be very certain about all those details, but I can't be certain with any details. You know, I've got to check everything. So it feels much more structured, this kind of writing, because you're in the straitjacket. It's too strict, but you've got to stay in period and in context. And that means constant checking of everything you write. You've got to double check.
So I think what's a common territory between historical fiction, the way you write it, and true crime, where you are making a concerted effort to try and figure out the criminal psychology, the crime scene, all the evidence. You have to stay also within those lines. It's only going to be authentic if you know those facts better than anyone else. If you try and tell a story and you actually get a date wrong or a fact wrong, the power's gone immediately. It's like, wow, that's actually wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Over.
Yeah.
But what I've tried to do, because true crime's not really my thing. I think, you know, as a South African, it's like crime. It's the last thing I really want to think about or talk about, right? But there is something meaningful about true crime in the same way I think there's something meaningful about war, where you can take a subject that's about adversity and testing someone's character, and what does it say about society? And you actually mentioned that earlier. What is war, and what is how we respond to evil? What does that say about us? You know, how do we deal with difficulty? How do we deal with a nightmare? You know, do you try and escape it, or do you face it, kind of thing? And that's where I think somewhere along that line, I feel you've got to find, because everything we're talking about is you using the analytical side, the logic side of your brain, right? But I think for it to be balanced, and that's where I think you bring in the fiction side. You've got to generate something that comes from you. And I think that thing that comes from you is from your mother, and I think maybe even from your own love for ships and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It can't just be dry facts. It's got to be something that's also authentic, but that comes from the heart, where we are addressing society in a way that's meaningful and relevant, you know.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head about war, the similarity between war and crime. I think in times when your country is not at war, the moment that you get, the places that you get the greatest intensity of emotion and passion and drama, and is in the crime space. In wartime, that's just crime on steroids, but that's what a war is. It's crime on steroids. So in a time of peace, humans are absolutely by crime for reasons. It's all those heightened passions.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's really been amazing having you on. Like, there were a lot of things I wanted to talk about, the whole Rhodes Scholar journey, and also being in Oxford. I would have loved to have spoken about that. I must tell you the same thing I said to Ron Irwin, which is, you guys have lived the writer's fairy tale, right? You guys you studied writing, you moved amongst great writers like, I think, J.M. Coetzee and so on, and went to Oxford. Ron went to Kent School, I think, in Connecticut, and then you got like proper publishing deals and great reviews, whatever. I've come a totally different route. I was a freelance. I never even you know, like in South Africa, you should have gone to Rhodes University, you know. Well, I never studied writing. I just studied like everything else. I studied economics.
Yes.
I studied building, quantity surveying. I studied law, all these different things. And I went the self-publishing route, which everyone said never do, you know. But I'm just saying, I sort of look at your journey and Ron's journey, and I'm the first person to say well done, and enjoy your fairy tale. I mean, that's you've achieved something special. It's not easy, and especially in the current sort of place that we're at, where a lot is on YouTube now, and writing a book is such a difficult thing. So, you know.
Well, to you too. I mean, it's a tough journey. It's incredibly fulfilling when you get the thing done and it's out there, and it's hugely rewarding to see people reading it and enjoying it. But it's a long, hard road to get there, and it's many hours of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of it is locking yourself in a room and being in a fantasy world that you have to kind of create. And yeah, there are rewards, but it's a long slog.
There's one other question I want to ask you, which is, do you feel, and I'm sure you may be feeling it now, do you feel that sense of writing doesn't want to let you go? So there's the thing where you are blood, sweat, and tears, but when you're between books, where you feel like you draw and you sort of suck back to writing, almost like an addiction.
Yeah. I kind of often think I wish I could give it up, but I can't imagine how I could possibly give it up. It's there. It's almost a compulsion. You know, I often think I wish I could just go and just not write for a year or two and have a break. But then I think about it and no, it's impossible.
Well, I'm in that space now. I'm trying not to write for at least 10 years.
Good man.
Like, yeah,
hang on to that.
I want to get to 60 at least, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
I see.
Deborah
asks, have I met Ken Follett? And no, unfortunately, I haven't. I've met a lot of the South African writers, the J.M. Coetzees and those sorts, but not many of the foreign writers.
So we've got about 9 minutes left, 9 minutes left. Any other writers that you'd recommend we talk to?
Have you spoken to Lauren Bierkus?
I interviewed her a long time ago. I suppose, yeah. Is she a friend of yours?
I know Lauren. Yeah, I could certainly put you in touch.
I've actually got a book here.
Right. Yeah. She'd be a good person to chat to. Yeah.
Okay. I'll look her up. I did interview a long time ago, I think for Fin Week or something like that on the state of the publishing industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll think about anyone else, but you could try Lauren. That would be a good one.
Okay. Okay.
And in the crime space, there would be, I mean, of the South African crime writers, the Dion Mayers, Mike Nicol, Sally Andrew, Margie Orford. They're all doing good work in crime fiction space.
Yeah. Dion Mayer, I think, is it Netflix, or I saw something called, I think it was called Die Jagd, the Hunt. That was either on Showmax or Netflix. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
With a sort of Barbie type character who surprises all these Afrikaner dudes. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah. Okay. I must say, I personally struggle with crime fiction because to me it's nothing like true crime.
Yeah.
Like I just struggle with it. It's just yeah. Anyway, Stephanie says I must get my son from school. So I just want to thank everyone who's been with us. And Deborah, we're going to be asking you how the book's going, what you thought. I'm sure Justin's expecting a review there. He wants to get 2,500, right, Justin?
Always.
Cool. Okay. Laurie says it's very interesting to hear your different processes. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach as an author.
Absolutely not. Yeah. Every author I speak to has a completely different process, and it's just what you get comfortable with or what you can live with, you know.
I do think a sort of a basic advice is try and write fast, whatever that means to you. You know what I mean?
And every day, if you could do it even if it's half an hour, to get the muscle memory and just to get in the rhythm of it. That's because if you start procrastinating and leaving it for a day or two or three, it's easy to fall off the wagon.
You have to stay in it, and if you write it quickly, you have a better chance of staying in it.
Yeah,
it's extremely hard to write and then leave it for even one day. And if you keep doing that, you leave it for one day. It's extremely hard to come back. Oh, where was I? But if you wake up and the first thing you do is write, then you know where you are.
Yeah, and it's also important not to edit while you go. Just get it all down. Doesn't matter if it's it's rubbish, because you will come back and edit again and again. It's just get it down. Get
the draft done, edit afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So a lot of people just saying thank you so much. Quite a few saying what a great live this was, what a great discussion it was. Renee says great hearing you two correspond. Melissa says discipline is the best way to avoid procrastination. Must you say you sound very disciplined and very structured, like 1,000 words by lunch. And but also you're
not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave your desk unless it's there. You know, there's no the carrot is getting up from your desk.
Renee says I'm going to read my book before I watch the movie so I can know the story. And just taking Bradley Cooper. So if you're interested, I don't know if it's your cup of tea, Justin, but I think you've got at least 2 movies you must maybe watch. The one is All Quiet on the Western Front.
Definitely.
That's going to blow your mind. I mean, that is a really, really powerful movie. Quite heartbreaking as well, which I think all war movies and war stories inherently are in some way. And then Limitless, just that fairy tale. I mean, it's the very unlikely fairy tale of a writer who's in his in his best space. But what I found really interesting is this idea that when you are crystal clear, if you as a human being are crystal clear, what can you do? Well, you can learn languages, you can write books effortlessly. You can do this and that and the next thing. And I just found the idea that, well, when you are super intelligent, what might be the first thing you would do? Well, write a book. It does demonstrate the idea of how much kind of when I say intelligence, I kind of mean a lot of the things that go into intelligence, being logical, but just really being clear-minded. you've got to be clear-minded to write a story that's going to be coherent.
Absolutely,
And that clarity comes with consistency, you know.
Yeah. Practice.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Deborah. Thanks a lot for that. I know Deborah's really loved you, Justin. She's just been constantly saying how much she's enjoyed it. She's a
Great.
military lady in Australia.
Great. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so we've got like 3 minutes left. I want to say goodbye before the lights go out. They may not go out, but who knows? But anyway, Justin, thanks very much again. And we wish you all the success with, what is it? The hunt.
Wolf hunt. The wolf hunt.
Wolf hunt. Let's just bring that up. Good luck with that. That's the second book in the series. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So guys, if you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to hit the like button and share amongst your networks. Shall I put up your Facebook link just before we go? I've still got it here.
Sure.
Can I find it? Well, we'll put it in the comments.
Yeah. It's Justin Fox Author. It's easy.
Justin Fox Author on Facebook. Okay. Okay, guys, thanks very much. Justin, have a good night. Guys,
thank you, Nick. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. It's great to be with you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, ciao.
Cheers.